Hello and welcome to another episode of MacStories Unwind. I'm John Voorhees, and I have Federico Vitici with me. Happy Friday, Tici.
Happy Friday to you as well, John. How are you?
I'm doing really well. It's been a big week. It's been a weird week. I don't know. Every week's a little different, you know? That's what's exciting about what we do.
Every week's a little weird, if you think about it.
You know, and it was a hardware week. You got some new hardware. I don't have any new hardware to talk about. But
I do. Hold on. Let me grab it. It's
let me
right
see.
here.
Yeah, let me see what you got there.
Let me grab it. It's here. I got a MacBook Neo.
Oh, boy.
This
Yeah.
is the MacBook Neo.
Very nice. So Federico's showing it off on camera, and it looks very much like a MacBook Air, as I know a lot of people have said. I like that new wallpaper they've got there, that purple and green, and very nice colors.
It's pretty thin.
Yeah,
You know?
yeah. I mean,
Got a headphone jack. Got two slow USB-C ports.
the fact that one of them's USB 2 is really kind of sad. That's like 10-year-old technology. But hey, you know, if all you're doing is plugging in a dongle or something, it's okay for a lot of things.
Yeah. I spoke about this computer unconnected. I think there's something so nice, and in a way, even though it's a computer made of old parts, there's something futuristic about it in the sense that it's powered by a binned chip from a phone of 2 years ago, and it's running full-blown Mac OS. And you pick up this computer and you think this is a Mac. Like, even though they took out all of the modern niceties of a Mac, right? ProMotion, fast charging, MagSafe, display tech, the notch, Thunderbolt 5, you name it. But you still pick it up and it's a Mac. And you say, oh, this is a Mac. And it's running Tahoe, and it's using, compared to other computers, it only has 8 gigs of RAM. And it turns out those are not enough to power, they do power Mac OS, but the moment you start opening a bunch of apps and working with a bunch of apps at the same time, it goes to swap, which means it's using storage instead of RAM to store, things that are supposed to be in memory. It's swapping to storage, and it's not as fast as other computers. And yet, despite all of that, it's so nice, right? It feels nice. The keyboard is nice. The size, I feel like it's so much nicer than a 14-inch MacBook Pro, especially if you're an iPad user. And I was doing exactly this today. I was moving back and forth between the iPad Pro and macOS Tahoe on the MacBook Neo. And I realized how, despite the iPad Pro still being so much more powerful, I have an M5 on loan from Apple. Using iPadOS on an iPad Pro sometimes still feels so much slower than even macOS on a MacBook Neo. And I think it comes down to a couple of things. The first is and this is actually something that I complained about to Apple many, many times in private and off the record. The way that animations are designed on iPadOS, the animation curve, the speed of those animations and those visual transitions, they are slower than macOS.
Right.
It's almost like they're holding your hand when they show you, oh, this is a window that is animating on screen, and now it's moving, and now it's coming up from the dock. And I wish that iPadOS, like the very core of the iPadOS animation curve, was a little bit faster. The other problem is that there are still so many weird things with just using multiple windows on iPadOS. For example, just 5 minutes ago, before doing this, I was finalizing my section for MacStories Weekly. Mm-hmm. And I had a Notion on the iPad open and Safari open at the same time. And I was using a shortcut to upload a screenshot to our CDN. When you run a shortcut from the dock on an iPad, you get the little notification banner, right? That sort of shows you that the shortcut is in progress. That notification banner blocks interactions underneath other windows, but only sometimes.
Oh, okay. Weird.
And it's the inconsistency that kills me.
Is it a native app versus a third-party app thing, or is it something else?
I have no idea. I have no idea, but I wanted to, that shortcut was running in the fake dynamic island that they have for live activities on the iPad. And I wanted to click, there was the Notion window on one side and Safari on the other side, above it.
Okay.
But I could see a portion of the Notion window, right?
Sure.
In theory, on macOS, when you click on a window that is in the background but visible, it comes in the foreground, right? On the iPad, I was clicking on that Notion window and nothing was happening.
Oh, that's
I
too
had
bad.
to minimize Safari in front of it, and then I could interact
Oh.
with the Notion. Like and this is just one
That's
very
a weird
specific
little
example.
thing.
And so all this to say, all things being equal, in the sense of a computer that is 13 inches and a computer that is 14 inches. Actually, no, they're both 13 inches. Sorry. They're now both 13-inch computers, the iPad Pro and the MacBook Neo. One of them is incredibly more powerful than the other one. The other one runs macOS, and it kind of chugs along when running macOS and a bunch of apps. And yet, it feels less weird sometimes than a mighty M5 iPad Pro running the latest version of iPadOS. And I kind of don't know what to think about that.
Yeah, I
honestly.
think for me, the thing about it that I could never fully move to an iPad workflow is the lack of the clipboard manager. So much of what I do when I'm doing like production stuff, I was just like before we started working on app stories for next week and NPC. And a lot of that stuff with like show notes, it's like, oh, paste them into Libsyn, paste them into YouTube, paste them into Patreon. I just have a lot of places where the same stuff goes over and over again, and not being able to do that as easily on the iPad is a real pain. So
yeah, I live in Command Option C in Raycast, which is the keyboard shortcut that I have for the clipboard manager.
Yeah.
It's so well done. But yeah,
that's good.
I really like this computer. And in fact, I am gonna, as soon as we're done recording, I'm gonna grab the MacBook Neo. The iPad is updating to 26.4 beta, which supposedly does continue to improve some aspects of multi-windowing. So I'm gonna graduate to 26.4 beta 4, see what happens. But I'll finish getting my work done for MacStories Weekly on the MacBook Neo today.
Good idea.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm running into more bugs than usual in this beta season. I think I've already briefly mentioned that I had to go into DFU mode for my iPhone and completely rebuild it from scratch. And I've been having all kinds of problems with shortcuts, which is what I wanted to briefly touch on before we get to our picks, which is the other night I was building a tool that I've always wanted. I've always wanted a personal podcast feed of articles I've saved for later. And I've had ideas on how to build that before. And it wasn't really until Claude Code, though, when I was really able to put it together. And so I have like two things I want to mention. The first is there is a plugin for Claude Code called Superpowers made by Jesse Vincent. And it is unbelievably good, because what it does is, I mean, there's a lot of satisfaction in describing something you want and having it one-shotted by an AI agent. On the other hand, if you really want to get something that's good and probably not less brittle and, prone to break, something like Superpowers is a lot better direction to go, because what it does is it starts with brainstorming, where you basically describe what's on the top of your head for what you want. Then Claude asks you a bunch of questions about, what features is it going to have? How would it be designed? What platforms? The whole thing. Then it goes into planning mode and it comes up with like a structure and a design for the app, and then it kind of presents that to you in chunks that are very easily digestible, and you just kind of read through it. And it's like, does this seem good to you? And I'm like, and so then you'd have a bit of a back and forth on the design. Eventually, it gets a whole plan. And then it just goes off and dispatches a whole bunch of sub-agents and builds the thing for you in stages. And it does it it kind of chunks it up in a way where it doesn't, first of all, it has this incredibly long document that it's created so that it can, between compacting the conversation, it can get back to what it was doing. And it just chunks it up too really nicely so you can kind of see where it's going, see what it's completed. And then if it has to do its compacting and start, the context over again, it can pick up pretty easily, because it's not, very rarely is it in the middle of one of those things when that happens. So that is a really good plugin. And what I did was I basically told it, look, I have articles that I save for later. I want you to, one, use the Defuddle API to pull out a markdown version of the article. Two, I want you to use this skill that I created a while back that takes out all of we talked about this before. It cleans up the text for spoken audio. So it takes out like the markdown links. It changes MAH to milliamp hours, for instance. So it doesn't have the text to speech doesn't say ma instead of milliamp hours. And then once it does that, it runs it through a local Koroko text-to-speech LLM that runs on my Mac Mini and turns it into speech and puts it into an RSS feed, which I subscribe to, in Apple Podcasts. It's quite a process, and it's all on my little Mac Mini server. And the hardest part about building this, Federico, because that all happened like one afternoon in the background for like 45 minutes. The hardest part was I just wanted to do this with a shortcut. I just wanted to send my articles into the server using a URL. That's all it needed. I designed it specifically to make it super simple for shortcuts, but I couldn't get shortcuts to pass URLs from Safari for me. It had broken. And so I wasn't able to grab a URL to tack it onto my API endpoint URL and send it into my server. And I fiddled around with it forever. And then I finally realized, it's not sending anything at all from the share sheet. So I ended up building a native app for it, which the problem with building a native app is that I can't leave well enough alone. All I needed was a native app that gave me access to the share sheet. Easy enough. Not hard for Claude to do that. But of course, then I had to make it nice and, design it a little bit and add a few features. And now not only can it take URLs, but it can take pasted text and all sorts of things. But my point being is that it was a lot easier to make that native app, even once I was going beyond the bare bones of it all, because with an AI agent, it can do things like logging, and it can troubleshoot, and it can look up things on the web, and it can fix the problems. Whereas with shortcuts, you're kind of left with things like, all right, I'll put an alert here, or I'll do a show content action there and see is it passing anything back and forth. There's just no way, there are no good ways to debug that stuff. And it was frustrating. And it made me wonder whether, what is the future of shortcuts in a world where we have tools that can just kind of do this for us, where I wouldn't have probably built a script, I wouldn't have built a native app like this just for this situation in the past, but with Claude Code, I could do that. And it wasn't like it took me a huge amount of time either. So I don't know.
Nice. Okay.
But it's a good tool though. It's kind of a fun little project. It's not anything I'm going to put out into the world, but the local LLM is slow though. It's very slow to do the conversion. So if you have a long article, it takes quite a while.
All right. Well, do you want to talk about some picks?
Yeah, we should talk about some picks. You want to kick it off?
I've been playing Resident Evil Requiem on my gaming PC. It's a scary game, but what I really like about it is that it alternates between two characters. Yeah. So you play as Grace Ashcroft, this FBI agent, or more like a researcher, analyst who gets sent on to research this case of these mysterious deaths. And all of these deaths have like these elements in common. Like all of the victims have these weird black bruises on their bodies, for example. And she gets sent first to investigate at this location at the fictional Wrenwood Hotel, which also happens to be the same hotel where her mother was murdered a few years prior, 10 years prior, I believe. And while Grace was present with her and also a kid.
Oh, wow.
And so that unlocks a lot of memories and flashbacks and trauma from the past.
Yeah, I remember that from the trailers.
You also play as Leon from Resident Evil 2, Resident Evil 4, who is a cop who is also investigating whatever is going on. And the game actually alternates between the more dark and anxious and scary and like survival horror parts with Grace, where you're supposed to be stealth because you're also taken captive after the initial sequence of the game. And so you're supposed to sneak around, and there are these like classic Resident Evil, scary moments. Yeah. And the action sequences of Leon, who's an absolute, monster when it comes to just shooting zombies in the face with a shotgun.
Yeah.
And that Brandon on NPC described it, this process of like the tension and the release of the game, like this push and pull. And I think it really works well because you play for like an hour as Grace, and then you're like, okay, now I can kind of unwind with Leon and just shoot a bunch of zombies and kick a bunch of zombies in the face for 20 to 30 minutes, and then I go back to Grace. And so I've been playing a little bit. It looks absolutely stunning on my 5090 gaming PC with path tracing and ultra settings. And I have been away from the franchise for a few years. Now that I'm playing video games during the day rather than at night, I find this game a little bit more acceptable because I'm not playing in the dark.
Yeah.
And, I tend to be a little susceptible to that.
No, I hear you. I don't think I'm going to play this game because I got a lot of other games on my plate, and I don't know. I'm not a huge fan of horror games myself.
Mm-hmm. All right. Makes sense.
But but it looks like a great game from all accounts. It's a very good one in that genre. So, yeah, fantastic. I am going to recommend Monarch Legacy of Monsters this week. This is season 2, and it picks up where the last season leaves off with King Kong and Godzilla. And one of the criticisms I think that was leveled against this show in the first season was that there were just so many monsters, it was a little disjointed. This is focusing more specifically on Titan X, which is a Titan that gets released from the Titan's world through a series of events in the first episode. And the very first episode is super well done because it's just a lot of action, a lot of monsters. You've got King Kong rampaging on his island with, while there are the scientists and the Monarch people there. There are elements of this that reminded me a little bit of Jurassic Park. Especially the scenes on the island where all the various Titans and other monsters happen to be. Because I actually just did watch that Jurassic Park movie, the last one. I forget, maybe it's 7? I forget the exact name of it, but it's the one with Scarlett Johansson. It is not a good movie. Don't watch that movie. It was on like HBO, and I watched it the other weekend. But this Monarch Legacy of Monsters season 2, so far, there are only 3 episodes out, but it's been really fun so far. The first thing that happens is Kate and Kentaro and Hiroshi all go and rescue Lee Shaw, who has been abandoned in the Titans world, and they have to go back and get him. And when they go back to get him, that's how Titan X gets released, which I don't think is too much of a spoiler because that's really the premise of the entire season is Titan X is now out into the world, into the human world, and they have to try to capture that Titan. And then it flashes back a bunch into the 50s where they're showing some of the early Titan action, very much like they did in the first season, but it's a following up of that story as well, and it has a connection to Titan X. So, so far so good, and I think it's a lot of fun. Right. So, Federico, right. I do have a actual Unwind deal to mention,
and I do have a question for you before we go.
Oh yeah, okay. Well, let me tell you about the Unwind deal, then you can ask me a question. The Unwind deal is a 4-pack of Tom Hanks movies. All right.
Okay.
We've got Forrest Gump, Catch Me If You Can, The Terminal, and Road to Perdition, all for $10. So I'll put that in the show notes. Those are good movies, yeah. So what's your question?
John, what do you do when an iPad OS software update is stuck on verifying update?
Unverified. What? That I don't know. I mean, I will tell you that be careful because mine got stuck.
Am I bricking this device?
You might be. That's what happened to me with my phone. I mean, I got past verifying. I actually got to the progress bar, but I only got a tiny way through it, and it wouldn't do anything forever.
Why? The one time I wanted to work on the iPad today after... Thank you for listening to Unwind.
We'll be back in another week. And stay tuned. Federico will disclose whether his iPad was bricked and whether he had to do DFU mode just like I did a couple of weeks ago.
Thank you, John.
Have a good weekend.
You too. Bye.
Bye.